several years ago, I mean, I began teaching, first of all, in 1974 at the University of Guyana. And I'll sit, because in discussions, that's what one does generally. And I was very fortunate that after 2 years, I had exposure to a group from the University of London called the University of London Teaching Methods Unit, a group that came to Guyana as part of I guess a British Council mechanism. And they really made a tremendous impact on me. Before that, I had been at a university that did not specifically have evaluations of teaching. So many of you will go to universities that don't. If you do, one of the first things you can do for yourself is to set up your own evaluation system. Don't say, hey, it's great, I'm at University of X that doesn't have an evaluation system. Do some kind of evaluation system, even if it's only the very simple method of, at the very middle of the quarter, giving people a very simple sheet that says, what am I doing well, and what could be improved. The problem with most evaluation systems, where they do exist, is that you get them, they're done at the end of the course, so you can't change what you're doing. And then secondly, if it's any place like Stanford, you get the results anywhere from 3 months to 6 months after the course is over, by which time you can't even remember what the course was about, really, if you have any kind of decent teaching load. But I had taught at at Johns Hopkins University one semester, I guess, in 1976. And I received some course evaluations that kind of made me a little unsettled. And I'm of the firm opinion that nobody teaches badly because they want to. I mean, none of us does research badly because we want to. And to the extent that we learn how to do research better, we usually go out and try to improve. Most of the time, we have a sense that something is wrong, or evaluations tell us something is wrong, but we really don't know what to do about it. So this wonderful workshop that I had was only a week, taught me a lot of things that I have used throughout my teaching career since then. And to the extent that I teach well, I follow those principles that I learned. One doesn't always follow the things that one learns, so one doesn't always teach well. But to the extent that I do, it's those principles that guide me. Actually, there was a little book called Improving Teaching in Higher Education, which they use as a text. I think it's very hard to get hold of now. And it's one of the things that I'm drawing on for my own presentation today. But let me tell you what I wanted to do first. Let me give you a little outline. First of all, I want to circulate. I expected a small group of about 15 or 20. So I brought some sheets of paper. I'm going to pass some around here, some around there. And when they run out, just use any sheets of paper. And I'm going to ask each of you to just write down on this sheet of paper an answer to either of two questions, or both if you like both. One, what question about discussion leading would you most like to see answered in today's session? Or what's the biggest problem you have ever experienced with discussions or with discussion leading? Okay? So if you can take a few moments to write that down. If you didn't get my standardized sheet of paper, just take your own sheet of paper. And while you're doing that, I'll just tell you what else we'll try to do. The next thing we're going to do after that is have a buzz group discussion, break into some smaller groups and discuss two questions. One, what are the advantages and disadvantages of discussions relative to lecturing and other pedagogical methods? And then B, what are the characteristics of a good discussion? Right? I'm not going to ask you all to discuss both of them. I think I'll ask this side of the room to discuss question A, and I'll ask that side of the room to discuss question B. And then we'll do some general discussion of A and B, drawing on input from both groups. I said here with a recorder, that is somebody to write the points down, but that might be kind of difficult given the logistics of this room and the way we're crowded and everything. And then I'll go on to say a bit more about some specific topics, encouraging interaction, asking questions, the role of the tutor, and then tell you a bit about alternative small group and discussion formats, observing and evaluating discussions, and a summary, all by 1 o'clock. Okay, so what I need first is to have you fill out that card or fill out a piece of paper if you don't have a card telling me either A or B. what question about discussion leading would you most want today's session to answer? And then B, what is the biggest problem you've experienced with discussions or with discussion leading? Okay? So if you could just do that for me, because we don't go much beyond that until you do that. Okay? And once you have done that, if you could somehow funnel those back up to me, I take a look at them over here. And why don't you kind of collect over there and then just give me a stack? And okay, you'll collect over there. Okay, we'll take another minute for that. Okay. Good, thank you. All right, we'll have some more that come dribbling in, but if we just give them to Michelle, she'll get them up to me. Okay, now in the meantime, we have this half of the room, we'll call this A, and this half we'll call B. And I'd like you to form buzz groups. Now, buzz groups are the single most important thing I learned in this course, the course I took from the University of London Teaching Methods Unit, I guess 20 years ago. And it's groups of two, no more than 3 people who are going to discuss a common topic. So the people on this side should discuss what are the advantages and disadvantages of discussions relative to lecturing and other pedagogical methods, okay, in your group. And then the people on this side should discuss what are the characteristics of a really good discussion, okay? So when I say go, I will hear this buzz of wonderful discussion. Right? And turn and face each other and so on, you know. Introduce yourselves. Okay. Let's try to get back and discuss this topic. I brought along some papers to make tense. That is, one can either use name tags or tense to identify yourself. And tense are, of course, these nice little triangular objects that one makes. And you then try to just set it up. I also brought along some Scotch tape. We can use these to put in front of you. Of course, difficulty is a lot of people are sitting outside rather than inside. Nevertheless, let's try it in some way. So name tags would have been better for this group. Let me pass around some tense, and I can pass around some Scotch tape on both sides. So if you can write your name, and then here's some pens on this side, and I have at least one pen over here. If you can just write your names, then that would help, fairly big and broad, okay? And set that up in front or somewhere nearby. And let's hear from the people who looked first at the A question. By the way, there's space all behind here. There's space over here. So come on in if you wish, please. What about the advantages and disadvantages of discussions? And what I'd like is for the groups, the little buzz groups, to just give an idea of the kinds of points that came up in your group. They may not be your opinion. They may just be things that somebody else said within your group. But please go ahead now and give us some ideas of what kinds of advantages came up in your groups. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's see. You can get more people to talk within the group, and it's more interesting for the rest of us.
Okay. Yes.
In our group, discussing the main advantage of the lecture is efficiency in covering materials. The main advantage of discussion is just the level of involvement. So that's very basic.
Okay. Efficiency versus involvement. Okay.
Lectures are efficient if the people are motivated to learn it and understand the importance of what's being said. If they're not, then efficiency doesn't reach.
Okay, it's a question of motivation and which one actually then affects motivation more, lecturing or discussion leading. There's also an interesting question relating to that having to do with retention. How much is retained in either method? I don't know if that came up in any other groups. Yes?
When there's a chance for students to test their own ideas in a small environment,
Okay.
get feedback on that.
Right. Chance for somebody to test their own ideas. What else came up? What came up over here?
We have a pretty long list.
Go ahead.
The engagement of students, which is something important.
Engagement, yeah.
The topic came up of teaching is learning twice. That when one has the opportunity to teach to others, certainly personalizes the information.
You mean as a member of the discussion group, when you pass that information on to others, then it personalizes and maybe reinforces but your ideas. Okay.
And it gives the lecturer the opportunity to get some feedback on how they understand what's understood in this.
Right. Okay.
One of the concerns we had was often in the discussion group is that students clam up, and one of the solutions to that is what we just did here.
Right.
Break into small groups,
Right.
so people are armed when you come back together
Right.
with ideas to group, small group.
Right. Right. Yes. Now, of course, we should be doing a recorder, but as I said, because of the way this room is set up and everything, we don't have. We're not going to do that. So we hope you're making notes. And by the way, that's one of the things I didn't put down in any of my handouts. But you have to remind people to make notes during discussions, because a lot of people, they just kind of sit back. It's like films, and you bring a film into your class, and everybody just kind of cocks back and so on, and they don't ever make any notes. So you need to kind of create an atmosphere in which you encourage people to make notes on discussions and points that are raised in discussions. It's very hard after you've gone even 5 minutes in a discussion to remember all the issues that came up, especially in the ways that people frame them. So you really want to encourage your participants to make notes as they came up. A little point came up there that I think we don't always remember, which is that when you are in a discussion and you're getting this kind of constant feedback from the audience, you're getting a chance to see how people are learning, which is something that often as teachers we tend not to remember. You would think that we're as much concerned about learning, or ultimately learning is our big business. But we usually tend to focus on our own selves and our own little performance. So I have my lecture beautifully written, and I have my handouts, and I have my overheads and so on. And ultimately the issue is not about us. The issue is about what our learners are getting out of what we are doing with them in the course. And discussion gives you an opportunity to get that kind of feedback all the time, not just on midterms and exams and so on and so forth. Is there any group that didn't get a chance to speak? Let me just sample somewhere behind there. Yes?
One problem that comes up often in discussion groups that come with lectures is that people feel sort of reluctant to show whether they've done their reading assignments, and they feel anxious about speaking up because they feel like they might embarrass themselves with saying something which they haven't done enough work. So I find that's often a thing that's really hard to overcome, that people are simply afraid to show what they've done.
What kinds of solutions do we have to that problem? Some people mention that in these lists. problems of people being reticent to show knowledge or lack of knowledge. If there's a related problem that some people mention, how to get depth at the same time that you get involvement, because people sometimes feel that people may come not having done the readings and so on. Any ideas? Yes?
Breaking a larger group up into smaller groups makes shy people feel more comfortable about contributing.
Okay, so doing some version of buzz groups to begin with is helpful, especially if in the buzz groups the understanding is that you are not personally responsible for the points that you make. So that if you have a buzz group of 3 or 4 people, you're talking about issues that came up in your group without necessarily claiming ownership. Okay. The other thing that one can do, and I'm kind of accelerating here so we can, I'd like to discuss all of these issues, but to kind of help us get through, sometimes one can link a discussion to a prior assignment, especially a prior written assignment. So if you ask people, for instance, to do this, you use this technique in which you ask people to write some notes, or write a squib, write a reaction to a particular assigned reading, and to bring it for submission on that particular day. By and large, students will then have done the reading, and they'll come somewhat better prepared. And in fact, the thing that you ask them to write about may be the same kind of thing you ask them to discuss. So at that point, they tend to come with a little more background than when the syllabus just says, read pages 10 to 20 or 10 to 100, and you're then expecting them to have done that when they come in. Yes?
Yeah, excuse me, I used that before, and it works really well when you're focusing on, say, one article for your discussion section.
Right.
What I found, though, is that usually, I mean, especially with the quarter system, you're assigning multiple articles to be discussed in a weekly section, and then I would assign, just as you're suggesting, maybe 4 or 5 discussion questions, one of which was actually to be turned in a written form. And when we discussed that question, we had incredible discussion.
Right.
But since the other ones were not turned in, they didn't even look at the other questions.
Right. Any solutions to that? Any ideas about that?
Have them turn them all in, but you don't have to read all the answers.
I missed the last part of what you said.
Just because students turn in every question doesn't mean you have to read all the answers.
Right, no. But I think it's not just a question of reading. You're saying that...
Well, it'd be a lot of work to ask the students to prepare like 5
right.
written 2-page things.
Right.
It's not
Well,
impossible.
there's a solution to that, yes.
A couple thoughts. One is you could divide the group and have different parts of the class assigned to each question.
That's right.
The other thing you can do is have them hand in one and let it be known over time that you're always asking them to discuss a different one.
Right.
Instead of keeping them uncertain.
Right. Or you could do a variation. Those are both good suggestions. You could do a variation of the things some people do for exams, where they say, the exam will be on one of these 5 questions. And people then really do go off and try to prepare them all. That's a challenge, a very particular kind of challenge that's different from many regular discussions where you don't necessarily require knowledge. Sometimes it's good to, in fact, frame your discussions in ways that don't necessarily require knowledge of the reading. For instance, as a resident fellow, we often assign freshmen a book to read over the summer. And of course, they're the conscientious ones who come back with every page with highlighter and so on and so forth. But then there are the others who clearly just picked it up in the bookstore the morning of the discussion or something. And so we try to include questions that may relate to the larger issues that are raised in the book, but don't necessarily require a knowledge of every single point that's raised on every page. Now, you still want to include in the discussion some topics that allow the people who have done the deeper kind of reading to kind of display that and to raise the issues displayed there. But at that point, the other people can kind of just try to look interested or something, and you can have a bit different parts of the discussion for different people. Of course, I think a lot of times we tend to be afraid of free reign. It's partly because it usurps our role, or because, and this is the point I'm going to make a little later, but I may as well make it now, you don't want to be accused of not teaching. As a teacher, I'm the one in charge. I know the stuff. Knowledge flows downhill or whatever. I guess you're afraid that if you do too much of this stuff, people may say, well, does he really know anything? He just kind of sits there and nods and recognizes different people. And it takes a lot of confidence to not be afraid of that. One of the things that's often amazed me when you have a very good discussion going is how, when it goes very well, people can end up coming up with many of the points that you wanted to make. I mean, you could almost have your own little checklist and scratch off many of them. And then at the end, it may only be 2 or 3 other points that you have to make. In fact, this is partly what I'm doing here with this technique. I mean, I could have just dealt with the first part of this presentation by saying, you know, pluses and minuses of discussions using, you know, my own experience and the books I have and so on. But I think a lot of the points that I would want to make and a lot of points that the books make have already been made in one form or another by people in the group. And when they arise out of this kind of group participation and group discussion, they tend to be, you know, much more deeply felt, much more strongly believed, much more clearly understood than just presenting a very long lecture. Please come in, by the way. There's barely a space all up behind here, and I feel bad to see people kind of standing up outside. Any other disadvantages?
Along that line, we were talking about how to effectively deal with digression.
Digressions, right. How do you deal with digressions? Anybody? You needn't have been an A group, you know. You guys all have some expertise. How do you deal with digressions? Anybody? Yes.
Bounce the response, the digressive response off another student. You can see if that other student calls about it back. Sometimes it works, and
Okay.
sometimes it doesn't.
Kind of a reflector approach.
Draws the other students in. You
Yes.
don't want to digress as much.
Right. Okay. Any other suggestions?
I think that at some point you just have to crack the whip and make sure that the discussion is structured and that people stick to the text. I mean, you have to take the Stalinist approach at some point.
Okay. Right, so she's saying we have to crack the whip. Of course, you don't necessarily take a Stalinist approach, right? I mean, typically what lecturers do, what's the favorite phrase that we use? That's very interesting. That's a very interesting point, Jim. But can we get back to the other issue that we were dealing with? Yeah. Yes.
You can actually say that without, if you leave the but out, it probably has a different tone to it. So if you say, for instance, that's a very interesting point. And then just go back to the other thing without the little words like but, like that can kind of target to the person that they've been sort of, put off in some way.
Put off or put down. Yes, you're right. Sometimes, of course, it really is interesting. It's just not today's topic. You could say, so we really will talk about this next week, and keep those thoughts and do bring them again next week, and so on and so forth. Let's just turn over here and see what people consider the characteristics of a good discussion. So, any group.
People talking, not just a TA or a few students.
Okay, many people talking. Right. That probably is the thing that came up most often on these sheets, or at least the converse. Nobody talks. And I say, let's discuss this, and nobody talks. Okay? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yes.
Raising the topic in using as examples items that are relevant to the people in the group. So phrasing your topic with their experience.
Okay. So that's at least the beginning, at the beginning phase. Presumably, what we would mean is that as the discussion proceeds, your topics or your concerns do get maybe addressed, but from their perspectives, right? And I think a lot of times we have to be prepared for it coming out somewhat differently than how we, initiated it, because